Ever since I first made my top 13 scariest creepypastas video, people have been asking stuff like, where's Ben drowned? What about Mario? How about Lavender Town? I guess I should have made it more clearer, because that was a non-gaming creepypastas list. So I thought I'd make another list, this time about gaming creepypastas, because gaming creepypastas are cool. Well, let's get this out of the way first. If your favorite creepypasta is not on the list, or is not at number 1, keep in mind that this is simply my opinion, and my list. So please, be mature in the comments. Getting furious at someone for simply having a different opinion than you regarding internet stories will just make you look like an ass. So you're not gaining anything from getting mad at me for liking a certain story better than another. We all have different views and opinions. If you respect my opinion, I will definitely respect yours. Keep that in mind. Also, Ben Drowned will unfortunately not be on the list, to keep things fresh. I mean, how many freaking lists have already put that story at number 1? I'm not saying it's a bad story, far from it, but to me, it's been very overhyped and very overused in recent years, and therefore, I am unfortunately not going to include it on the list. I hope you understand. So with all of that out of the way, it's time for you to once again turn the lights down and the volume up. Yes, I know Sticky Paddle says that, because tonight we're counting down the top 13 scariest gaming creepypastas. So, unpopular choice coming up. Sonic.exe. What is it with me putting certain popular creepypastas so low on my lists? Well, to be honest, I don't find this story incredibly creepy. To me, it's filled with cliches and poor writing and is just very overrated. Just look at Euref Wind's video on this story. It's freaking hilarious. But like I've stated numerous times before, overrated doesn't always mean it's bad. Now I'm not gonna go all Jeff the Killer on this one like I did with my other list. I realized afterwards that I pretty much skipped over the entire story portion, and I apologize for that. Watch my Debunking Famous Creepypastas Part 3 video for a more in-depth analysis of that story. Anyways, back to Sonic.exe. The story tells us of how the author, Tom, receives a game disc in the mail from his friend Kyle, who asks him to destroy the disc. Tom, on the other hand, is piqued with curiosity and decides to play the game. The game depicts a demonic version of Sonic the Hedgehog with pitch black, bleeding eyes, terrorizing and driving his friends to insanity before brutally finishing them off. In the end, Sonic asks Tom himself if he's ready for round 2 and tells him to turn around as he has... You gotta be fucking kidding me. Lunged out of the computer screen and is now a Sonic plushie with black bleeding eyes and red pupils. Ooh, spooky. Now like I said before, I don't find this story to be incredibly scary, but there's still the undeniable fact that it does get some things right, even if it gets a lot wrong. The Kefka laugh concept, for example, is pretty creepy, especially in the ending. The music is also haunting and ominous, and the concept of Sonic torturing his friends is also, as weird as it may sound, an interesting concept. Despite the story being flawed, and in my opinion getting a bit more wrong than right, it's still creepy, and more than well deserves at least a spot on the list. Herobrine. This one needs no introduction. Possibly the most popular gaming urban legend of all time, Herobrine is a supposed mob in Minecraft that is the ghost of Marcus Persons, the creator of Minecraft himself's deceased brother. Many have speculated, and many have searched for him. Notch himself has even fueled the myth further by occasionally adding removed Herobrine in the update logs for numerous updates of the game. Watch out for those eyes! Now you might be wondering what the story is doing at the 12th spot, even though it's so popular. Well, to be honest, I personally do not find Herobrine's appearance to be very frightening. It's still an awesome story though, and one that needs to be on the list. The Theater. The Theater was a supposed game released around the same time as Doom. The game was notorious for its very unstable installation process and buggy gameplay, and no company names or logos could be found anywhere on the game. When starting a new game, the player would be dumped into a theater lobby with various pixelated posters of films to see. At the end of the lobby, a poorly drawn pixelated man, known as the Ticket Taker, would stand and observe the player. When approached, he would simply say,
"Thank you. Please enjoy the movie."
The player would then enter a dark corridor, presumably to see one of the movies, and then the screen would fade to black, before dumping the player back into the lobby once again. Repeating the same process numerous times would later cause the game to behave strangely in random intervals. The first strange occurrence would be that when dumped back into the lobby, the ticket taker would be absent. With nowhere else to go, the player ventures into the dark corridor. After the screen fades to black, the ticket taker appears on screen, but with a swirl for a face, and a loud screech sound could be heard in the background. The sprite has since been named the Swirly-Head Man. The game continues normally for a while after that, but then, at some point, you'd be placed back in the lobby, but the posters would have been replaced with the Swirly-Head Man, and the ticket taker would be pacing back and forth with a worried facial expression. When approached, he'd say,
"Never reach the other levels."
The screen would then fade out, and the player would once again be placed back in the lobby, but the ticket taker would be absent once again, and the dark corridor would be boarded up with a brick wall. Touching the wall would cause the game to crash. No one has ever gained access to the other levels, and no one knows why the Swirly-Head Man has put so much fear into those who have played the game. Search around yourself, and you might be able to find it. Maybe you will be the first to reach the other levels. Luna Game. The Luna Game was a game that was posted on the Equestria Daily forum. The game itself seemed to be nothing more than a funny, slightly generic platformer, but after playing the game for a little while, you will find yourself stuck. The game will then display a horrifying image of Pinkie Pie, together with a very creepy ambient song playing. The only way to exit the game then is to Control-Alt-Delete your way out of there. The game folder will then have saved numerous image files named "The End is Nay," and all will be the image of Pinkie Pie. The Brony community was forever scarred, and rules were set so nothing similar to this incident would ever happen again. Numerous sequels to the game has been made, but I, and many others agree, that the first one is the scariest, due to the shock factor in what seemed to be just any other innocent platformer. Mr. Mix. Mr. Mix was an educational PC game from the early 90s. The game had the player type words into a box to make the chef, Mr. Mix, put ingredients in a bowl. The game would become incredibly hard during later levels, making the 5th level impossible to beat. The soundtrack to the game consisted of patterns of growls, low-quality sound clips of a hairdryer, and high-pitched sounds that caused damage to the ears. Most children who played the game also reportedly had vivid nightmares about Mr. Mix, claiming he threatened them to keep quiet about something. For obvious reasons, the game did not sell well. It remained an obscure game until a few years ago, when a few hackers got hold of a ROM of the game and started digging through it. Using memory hacking software, they managed to bypass the impossible 5th level. What they found caused many of them to quit the expedition entirely. According to the hackers, the game behaved very strangely after the 5th level was beaten. The game crashes violently and closes, writing dozens of files into the user's System32 directory, to the point where the RAM was almost entirely filled. These files are reportedly pictures of people with deformed faces, appearing to scream in pain and agony, with tears of blood gushing down their faces, and outer layers of their skin had been torn clean in numerous areas. If the user attempts to delete the files, the computer will break entirely. The hackers later found out this was caused by a byte in the game's ROM that triggered once the 5th level was beaten. After removing this byte, they were able to play the final 6th level. Unfortunately, all of the hackers refused to discuss what they saw in the final level. All became extremely paranoid and refused to talk to anyone about the game, and all hackers soon went missing. 2 years after the incident, a man was arrested after trying to kidnap an 8-year-old girl from a grocery store. The man was identified as being one of the original hackers. He was wearing a white chef's hat and had a look of unspeakable malice and insanity on his face. When interrogated, the man would only say one thing:
"I'm Mr. Mix. Shh."
Fallout 3 Number Station. Here's a fun fact. I fucking love Fallout 3. It has an interesting story, together with an expansive and open world that begs for exploring. It has interesting characters, stories, and locations to go with it. But of course, with a game as legendary, and sometimes horrifying as this one, there's bound to be something creepy embedded in the game, right? Well, that's the case with the Fallout 3 number stations. Some players know that you're able to murder the radio host of Galaxy News Radio, 3Dog, and that after he's been killed, he will be replaced by an uninspired technician named Margaret. Once 3Dog is killed, you're forever stuck with Margaret on the radio. What a lot of people don't know, though, is that under rare circumstances, Galaxy News Radio will become a number station. Many number stations exist in real life, and some believe that they are nuclear retaliation control networks. No one knows exactly what steps to take to hear the number stations in Fallout 3. You must kill 3Dog, and you have to skip the quest Galaxy News Radio, and you have to destroy Raven Rock. This is the trigger that turns Galaxy News Radio into a number station. If you're lucky, After you've destroyed Raven Rock, you will receive the message "Radio signal lost," followed by "Radio signal found." In order to hear the broadcasts, you will also have to position yourself in specific areas, although none guarantee that you'll actually hear it. When you turn on the radio, you'll hear Three Dog, despite the fact that you've killed him. He seems bored, or rather depressed, and reads a series of numbers in a monotone voice. He'll never use a multi-digit number like 11 or 40. These numbers are followed by varying lengths of Morse code. This is then followed by the song "I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire," as all other music tracks seem to be inactive on the station. After closer inspection, the numbers were revealed to be dates, predicting such happenings as the death of Gary Coleman and the BP explosion in the Gulf. These are some of the supposed messages that the number station broadcasted. The Queen has died today. The world mourns, as on days like these, we are all Brits. 4/2, March 19th, 2014. Have you watched my YouTube video yet? I uploaded myself kicking bums in the nuts. 24/16, December 24th, 2012. I can't believe Britney's actually won an Oscar. 21:33, February 27th, 2023. I can't believe they've actually done it! Not long left. They were warned, but they just had to keep pushing the boundaries of science. The noise. I can't take the noise anymore. And the light. Dear God! The universe is slowly unraveling around us. I'm not going to wait for death. I have a pistol in the attic. This is the only message where a date cannot be found. Polybius. Polybius was a supposed arcade game released in the early 80s. The game itself is shrouded in mystery and is considered very obscure. The game itself was your typical space shooter, but many people reportedly suffered illnesses, epileptic seizures, nightmares, and in rare cases, suicides because of the game. The game would stay in arcades for a short while strange men in black suits were observing the players. The game would then be removed, with all traces of its existence removed. This has caused a lot of speculation circulating the game, and some believe it to be a government experiment to examine the effects of imagery on everyday people. And this wouldn't be the first time the government has experimented on normal innocent people. For example, the MKUltra project was an actual experiment conducted by the US government, where they took random people off the streets and conducted various experiments on them. So something like Polybius wouldn't be impossible. You know, this kinda reminds me of something. JVK 1166Z.ESP. JVK 1166Z.ESP was a rather unusual mod for The Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. At first, it seemed to be just a virus. It corrupted your save files and often caused the game to crash. After the author learns more about the game, through the help of another forum user, he manages to get the mod running through DOSBox. When playing the game, the author notices that all main quest NPCs are dead, and the player character's health is continuously dropping, slowly but surely. When the player eventually dies, a character known as the Assassin could be seen crawling all over the player's dead body on all fours inhumanly, like a spider. He could also occasionally be seen darting around a corner or crawling on walls and ceilings. At night, at random intervals, NPCs would go outside for a few minutes and say nothing but "watch the sky" before returning to their normal behavior. As the story progresses, the author and his forum friend finds out more and more about the assassin and about a strange door in the game that is always locked and that, if they wait long enough, it might just open. In the end, the forum friend tells the author that he's done, as the assassin was getting more persistent, and how the game kept turning incredibly dark, and how NPCs would run at random intervals like they were running from something, while the assassin could be heard screeching before attacking the player character. The user tells the author that he's done, that he's given up on the mod, and that he is also becoming paranoid because of it. The author jokingly replies that he should get some real sleep, and 2 mornings later, the author received the last email he was ever going to receive by the forum user. I just got up from a fucked up dream, I think. The assassin, he shrieked at me, and when I opened my eyes, he was right there, crouching over me. His arms and legs were longer, more like a spider's. I tried to push him away, but when I touched him, my hand just went inside, and I couldn't get him loose again, like he was made of tar or something. Then, I woke up. I thought he was gone, but when I looked at the monitor, I wasn't where I was. I was in the Corpusarium with Yagrum. For once, the light was okay, and I could see him all bloated on those mechanical spider legs. I sat down at the computer, and he started talking to me. Not in a box, but really talking to me, in Tiara's voice. He knew things about me. He told me things that I never told anyone, some things I totally forgot about. He told me that almost nobody had made it this far, and that the door would open up soon. I just had to hang on a little while longer. He said I'd know when it was time. He said I might be the first one to see what was inside. And then I woke up for real, but I was at the computer. I still wasn't where I was. I'm swimming out to the Citadel Island. All I can hear is this tapping. It's on my window. It's over on the left, so I'm sending you this, because I left my laptop by my bed, to the right. Just a little tap, 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 like he's knocking his finger against the glass. I might still be dreaming now. Misfortune.gb. Misfortune.gb was a supposed Game Boy game that could be found on certain cartridges of popular games, such as Link's Awakening, Pokémon Red, Spud's Adventure, Poochie Karat, and Atelier Marie. The few people who have experienced it consider it to be one of the scariest video games ever made. In the game, the player would control a young boy in a strange gothic building. The player is soon confronted by an evil being, assumed to be the devil himself. The being would say, "I exist within the very fabric of reality. Do you want to challenge me?" The player is then transported to a series of maze-like rooms. The objective is to progress through each room by finding stairs to other levels, or by solving puzzles. This included answering riddles and or choosing the correct pathways. The cabin puzzle, which shows 4 possible paths, is the most famous one, as a text box would appear, stating, "Choose wrong, and misfortune will befall your loved ones. Are you ready to play?" Choosing wrong would result in the screen fading to black, and a typical game over screen would appear, with a more detailed version of the being. along with the words, "I am God here." Allegedly, the game over screen caused many players to feel depression or dread, and apparently, some died or went missing. Some wrote the whole thing off as just a joke, yet some believed that viewing the image of the evil character really could cause the player to experience misfortune as the game's antagonist promised. Mario. Mario is a Super Mario World ROM hack that was first found on the SMW Central. The author of the story, Adam, was browsing through the hack section for Super Mario World when he came across a hack simply titled Mario in capital letters. The description of the hack seemed to have been translated directly from some other language, as it said. The description of the hack seemed to have been translated directly from some other language, as it said, "As you play the role of Super Mario Plumber, verify that you are beautiful Princess Utu Zutu Uru. Again, Bowser kidnapped the evil king. It is your job to save her. This hack includes 6 levels of very long." The hack folder included 2 files, an IPS file and a simple TXT file. The TXT file contained nothing but random indistinguishable symbols, except for one repeated phrase, "Find me." While playing through the peculiar hack, all enemies were missing, and touching most text boxes would result in strange messages being displayed, most notably during a cinematic in the game. Adam begins to speculate on the ROM and what it could actually mean. After some time, he comes to the conclusion that Mario himself was atoning for his actions and being plummeted into a hell that looked just like Yoshi's Island, where he was lost to the grip of death forever. After further research by other forum users, one of them got the brilliant idea to try and convert the TXT file into an image file, as it was revealed to be a JPEG image. When converted, the forum user was presented with what has been widely considered to be victim number 1. As there literally exists hundreds of Pokémon creepypastas, it's very hard to put all of them in a top 13 list. Therefore, I've decided to just include one of them, which is one of the most known ones, and in my opinion, the scariest. Honorable mentions go to Pokémon Creepy Black, Lost Silver, Glitchy Red, and Strangled Red. Without further ado, the number 3 spot goes to the Lavender Town Syndrome. Sure, it may be a cliché choice, but in my opinion, it is the scariest. When Pokémon Red and Green were released in Japan in 1996, there was apparently a peak in suicides and illnesses of children between the ages of 7 to 12. Rumor has it that these suicides and illnesses only occurred after the children playing the game reached Lavender Town. Allegedly, the first versions of the song in Japan had extremely high frequencies and binaural beats that caused young children to experience headaches, nosebleeds, sickness, and in extreme cases, according to the story, suicides. when a video was released on YouTube that showed what happens when you put the song in a special software. The software would create images of the unknown near the end of the audio, followed by one of the most sickening noises I have ever heard. This raised controversy, as the unknown would not appear until Generation 2 of Pokémon. Often accompanied with this story are also the stories of the allegedly removed Lavender Town content, such as the White Hand, the Buried Alive model, and the Ghost animation. The White Hand was an enemy that was said to appear in the Pokémon Tower, which was a white, decaying hand that had two attacks, Fist and Brutal. Several frames of these attacks are missing, but they apparently also caused children to feel sick. The Buried Alive model was a boss that was going to appear instead of the Marowak in the final game. The enemy would be what appeared to be a decaying human body that was crawling out of the ground, that would utter the sentences, "You're here. I'm trapped, and I'm lonely, so very lonely. Won't you join me?" The battle would then initiate. If the player would win, the game would freeze. If the player lost, Buried Alive would utter out, "Finally, fresh meat," followed by gibberish. It would then cut to a typical game over screen, along with a graphic image of Buried Alive devouring the player character, along with a creepy song playing in the background, known as Staticmesh.wav. The cartridge was then to download the image to the internal memory, and whenever the Game Boy would turn on, the typical Game Boy title screen would be replaced with the image of Buried Alive along with Static Mesh playing. The Ghost animation was an animation that was going to appear in the Pokémon Tower at numerous occasions. It was described as several frames of static, several frames of screaming faces, and of the Grim Reaper. No one knows what these frames mean, and lead programmer Hisashi Sogabe testified as to having no knowledge as to where these images surfaced. NES Godzilla. NES Godzilla tells us of how the author receives a strange copy of Godzilla for, well, the NES. While playing the game, it is very different from how he remembers it from his childhood. Levels were much different, graphics were changed, new characters were introduced left and right, and the entire time, the author is haunted by a terrifying creature known as Red. The story itself is very lengthy, and despite a few scary moments, is actually somewhat tame. Until the final chapters. Now, if you're planning on reading the story after this video, I highly recommend that you start from the beginning. But Chapter 7 is where things go completely insane in an intense, terrifying, and explosive climax with an epic showdown between the player and Red. And while, like I said, the story may seem slow or tame at times, it all builds up to the fantastic finale where everything pays off and scares the bejesus out of you. What really helps this story is also the very impressive sprite work that accompanies the story and makes it all the more believable. In the end, the author comes to terms with what Red is and what it wants to do, and ultimately faces his fears and grows as a person. I'm not going to spoil everything, as the story really builds on the characters and lets them grow, and while it may not be the deepest or most thought-provoking creepypasta out there, it's one of my favorites, and therefore, it deserves the number 2 spot. And, at long last, number 1. Remember how I said I was only going to include one Pokémon creepypasta? Well, I lied. I know, this may be considered cheating, but in my opinion, this story really is the scariest video game creepypasta that I have ever read, and I'm surprised it's not brought up more often. That's why I've decided to include it on the list, to let you all know about this fantastic story, and to keep the list at least somewhat fresh. My number 1 pick as the scariest video game creepypasta is Pokémon Come Follow Me. Following the increased deaths of youths in Japan due to Pokémon Red and Green, a team of detectives were set out to conclude just why this was caused by a simple video game. The story describes way more violent deaths than usual, such as how children committing suicides were found sawing off their own limbs, others sticking their faces inside ovens, and some choking themselves with their own fists by shoving their own arms down their throats. The few children who were saved before killing themselves showed sporadic behavior, and when asked about the games, the children would scream and scratch at their own eyes. This confirmed the suspicion that the games, somehow, had a connection to the increased numbers of suicides. The strange thing was that the games only seemed to affect some, and not others. Collecting all cartridges the victimized children had purchased, the police sealed them away as evidence for later. The detectives interrogated numerous people who had worked on the game, such as main programmer Takanori Uda and music composer Junichi Matsuda. Unfortunately, no conclusion was reached. The detectives decided to examine the cartridges further. Popping one in, they saw that the time for how long the children had played was incredibly low, and the children had only one Pokémon in their inventory. This made the detectives come to the realization that the Lavender Town music could not have been what caused the children to commit suicides. This brought them to the conclusion that something early in the game must have been the cause. After looking through the list of programmers for the game, they saw one of them, Chiro Miura, who had committed suicide shortly after the game's release. He had contributed very little to the game, but interestingly, he had asked not to be credited in the game. The detectives learned more and more about Chiro, and about why he so desperately wanted to be involved in the game. Chiro had an idea, and he wanted to program a Pokémon into the game unlike no other, that wouldn't just revolutionize the gaming industry, but the world as a whole. Through many strange and insane happenings, the detectives were at last directed to Chiro's work partner while making the game, Sosuke Tamada. When interrogating the man, the detectives felt very uneasy. The discussion quickly got heated, until Sosuke told them that Chiro was an idiot who was very easy to manipulate. Sosuke was able to control him flawlessly. Sosuke was the man who had planned it all. Sosuke told the men what to do, and they did it. It was all his idea, and when Chiro realized what he had done, it led to his ultimate demise. He furiously told the detectives that if they were so determined on finishing the case, why not play the game themselves? Roll the wheel, and who knows? Maybe you'll learn the secret for yourself, he told them, before swiftly killing himself. The case was put to rest, as the main perpetrator was now dead, and the police couldn't handle more people dying as a result of the investigation. 10 years later, in February of 2006, the lead detective, who had left the force long ago, got curious and picked up one of the cartridges that were sealed away 10 years ago, as he still had access to the old files. He pulled out his deceased son's old Game Boy, as both his son and wife had passed away some time ago, and put in the cartridge and turned the game on. Starting a new game, it was all normal. The detective started approaching the grass. He could hear Sosuke's words echoing in his mind. One step away. When he entered the tall grass, at first, nothing happened. It was like time stood still. The screen went black, and then lit up again, with text appearing on a blank background. The detective was shocked. On screen were words from his deceased family members, calling for him from beyond the grave, stating how they missed him and wanted him to come follow them. The detective started shouting as his eyes grew wide. He shouted at the game to bring his wife and child back. He wanted to see them. He wanted them back. Suddenly, the man heard hundreds of voices. As he turned around, looking behind him, in the small room were children. Hundreds of deceased children. Some had no eyes, some had rings around their throats, and some were burned across their whole bodies. They all screamed out things they had lost and wanted back, such as deceased relatives or family pets. They were screaming, crawling, and reaching towards the detective. "Come follow me," said a calm voice. There, in front of the detective, stood Sosuke, like a saint. The detective could not believe his eyes. Sosuke, who had killed himself, stood there in the room, tall, handsome, and calm. Sosuke opened the detective's old drawer and pulled out his old gun from when he was in the force. A gun which the detective had sworn never to use again after he left. But now, the detective saw it as the only way. He saw it as the only way to see his family again. The detective looked back at the dead children, still crawling and reaching out for him and for the game. He looked back at Sosuke and picked up the gun from Sosuke's hands. He put it to his head, smiled back at Sosuke, and pulled the trigger. His body was found days later, a gun in one hand and an old Game Boy in the other, with Pokémon Red inserted in it. This was the last straw for the authorities. Too many people had died because of the case. The only remaining detective decided to personally carry out every single cartridge and burn all of them. They would hurt no one no more.